Hi, you're listening to Yellow King Filmboy. Quentin Tarantino is known to speak his mind. He is not afraid to express his opinion on other movies, even if sometimes it ruffles a few feathers. He recently did an interview, a great 2-hour interview with Eli Roth called The History of Horror, which I highly recommend. Within this lengthy interview, there is a segment where Tarantino is asked about a recent reboot of Stephen King's It movie. I have a clip of this segment later on in the video, but to summarize what he said, Tarantino says he only felt that the It movie was just only okay, and then went on to suggest that Stephen King had basically ripped off the idea and story of Pennywise from Wes Craven's movie Nightmare on Elm Street, and specifically the character Freddy Krueger. Now, is there any merit to this accusation? Well, Wes Craven's Elm Street movie was released in 1984, and Stephen King's 1,138-page novel came out in 1986, 22 months after. Stephen King has addressed this accusation in the past, and he claims to have been immersed in writing it long before Elm Street's 1984 release. Both stories feature a bogeyman monster who is a shape-shifting spectre who haunts the local children. Tarantino is not the only person to see the comparison. There are many debates online about this, and here's just a few comments from Reddit. Honestly, when watching the film, it feels like a Nightmare on Elm Street film at many points. A lot of the scenes could have been straight from an Elm Street movie. Just replace Pennywise with Freddy. Freddy and Pennywise are both part of a very, very old storytelling trope, wherein a shape-shifting demon trickster goes after the kids. They're the bogeyman. There always been one and always will be. Even director Andre Muschietti could see the connection. He put some references to Elm Street in the film, but even considered having Pennywise shapeshift into Freddy Krueger in the 2017 movie. He said in an interview, "Obviously, we considered that for a bit, but I wasn't too interested in bringing Freddy Krueger into the mix. I love the story, and I love how Stephen King basically makes a portrait of childhood in the 50s. He's very genuine when he brings all the universal monsters to the repertoire of incantation, because that's what kids were afraid of. It would be a natural path to try to recreate that in the 80s. But I really wasn't too crazy about bringing stuff like Freddy Krueger into the story. I thought it was a bit too meta, with New Line involved in the film. It's distracting, and it didn't feel right for some reason. I wanted to bring fears that were a little more layered and related to childhood trauma, and more surprising in general. I think that Stephen King was open to that. When he saw the film, I basically wrote a letter to him asking him for forgiveness for having taken so many licenses, especially with the many different incarnations of Pennywise. He said, 'Don't worry about it, all the changes are great.'" Anyhow, here's that clip from the Tarantino interview in question.
I never read the book. When I watched it, I was like surprised. Oh, okay, well, yeah, I can see that the guy who wrote, The Body, AKA Stand By Me, well, this is that writer, and then he's adding a thing to it, but I think it's very naked what it is. It's like It is basically Stephen King saw Nightmare on Elm Street and did his ripoff of it. The book It is Stephen King's ripoff of Nightmare on Elm Street. He just replaces Freddy Krueger with Pennywise. And it's just exactly like, oh, okay, he sees Nightmare on Elm Street. Oh, wow, that's a really neat idea. Oh, that's really clever. Okay, that's cool. Well, let me take that idea and let me do my version of it. Now, his version of it is going to be a 560-page novel as opposed to one-dimensional characters, at the most two-dimensional characters. He's going to have four-dimensional characters. And the whole history of every one of them, as far as the kids and their relationships with their parents and their parents' relationships in the town, and the whole town will be a thing. He's a terrific writer in that regard. So he fills it full of minutia, and he fills it full of his good prose, and he fills it full of his good writing, which is what Wes Craven didn't have. Take away all that cake frosting and all the little frosting flowers that are put on it and all that, It's basically a ripoff of Nightmare on Elm Street.
Interesting.
Just baked inside of
this
a
beautiful,
gigantic
1,000-page cake.
1,000-page cake. Yeah.
Wes Craven was inspired to write the screenplay after reading a few newspaper articles about mysterious deaf dreams reported by several Asian young men, including one who later died in his sleep. The federal government even looked into the disturbing phenomenon back in 1981. In an interview in 2014, Wes Craven shed more light on this inspiration. He said, "I'd read an article in the LA Times about a family who had escaped the killing fields in Cambodia and managed to get to the US. Things were fine, and then suddenly the young son was having very disturbing nightmares. He told his parents he was afraid that if he slept, the thing chasing him would get him. So he tried to stay awake for days at a time. When he finally fell asleep, his parents thought this crisis was over. Then they heard screams in the middle of the night. By the time they got to him, he was dead. He died in the middle of a nightmare. He was a youngster, having a vision of a horror that everyone older was denying. And that became the central line of Nightmare on Elm Street." While on the other hand, Stephen King says his inspiration for It came from The Three Billy Goats Gruff, a classic Norwegian fairy tale about three scrappy goats outsmarting a bridge troll. This might sound like a far cry from a 1,000-page plus horror novel, but Stephen King cites it as a primary inspiration. He expanded the bridge to encompass an entire city, and the troll morphed into the terrifying demonic entity known as It. So, what do you think? Is Tarantino right? Do you think Stephen King ripped off Wes Craven? Do you think Tarantino is stretching this conspiracy a little too thin? And does it really matter anyhow? Leave a comment. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all those shenanigans. It is all very much appreciated. See you next time.